It's Madam Modise in?
Yes, Chairperson.
National Treasury?
Yes, I saw Dr. Modise. Yes, Chairperson, she's in.
Okay. Just indicate that we can start.
Okay, Chair. Okay, let me check Esther for some strange reason. She's struggling to join. Let me check Estelle, Chair.
Can you please assist Honorable Ryder? Is struggling.
No, I'm on now, Chair. It's now just Willie Ocamp who's struggling. Thank you.
Estelle?
Okay, Papa. Okay, Papa. Okay, Papa. Hi, Chair.
Is there anyone who's helping you with the hosting? Or Honorable Ocamp is struggling to get in?
Yes, Chairperson. I'm phoning Mr. Ocamp just now. Chairperson, can you please ask just a few minutes, Chair? I'm going to come back and report to you.
Okay. Okay.
Hello, Chair.
Hello.
Chair, I spoke to Mr. Ocamp just now. I was on the phone with him. I've re-forwarded him the link. So, seeing that so far he's the only one who's struggling together with Estelle, I would like to propose that you can continue with the meeting, but in the background, I'll continue to assist them as Dr. Amambo and her team are continuing with the presentation.
Okay. Is Mama Rehane on the platform?
Mama Rahane and the Honorable Njatu, they are in the WIPAR Chairperson, but they are going to join us. I was going to address their issue.
Okay.
Apologies.
Okay. Okay, honorable members, I think we can start while the Secretariat is assisting with other members who are struggling to log in. A very good morning to all the honorable members on the platform. And I would like to open this meeting by giving you a special welcome to the start of another process And I wish to welcome Team Treasury, which is led by Dr. Mampo. I'm told that they are on the platform already. And their reason for being with us today, they are the only item. They are going to Section 77 bills, that is B4 2021 and the Special Appropriation Bill B5 2021. And I trust that we all have received the agenda, we have received the minutes for consideration, and I hope that by that time we will be having a full quorum, a full house for us to be able to adopt the minutes. Before I take more of your time, honorable members, let me allow the secretariat, I don't know that because he's busy assisting other members, to indicate if there are apologies.
Thank you,
Secretariat.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning, Chairperson, and good morning, honorable members and colleagues who have joined us in this meeting. Chairperson, we received 2 apologies. Honorable Mamarachane and Honorable Gatote, they are attending the party, which started exactly at 9 o'clock, but they indicated that as soon as they are done, they will join us.
I'm sorry.
Can you mute, please, Honorable Karim?
I don't think it's 12. I'll check.
Honorable Karim, can you please mute? Okay. Yeah, you can continue.
Well, I was saying, Chairperson, we received 2 apologies from Honorable Njatu and Honorable Mamarachane. They are attending the party, Chair. They indicated that as soon as that meeting is done, they will join us.
Okay, thank you very much, Lubabalo. Honorable members, let me remind you that these 2 bills that we are going to deal with today, they will be passed. I know that you know, but for record purposes, we need to remind each other that they will be passed in the National Assembly this Friday, the 4th of June, 2021. And thereafter, they will be formally referred to this committee for concurrence. So hence, we are starting with our own process. Remember, honorable members, that these are Section 77 bills, and as such, we process them differently to Division of Revenue Bill. No provincial mandates are required. We are all familiar with that by now. Nonetheless, before I waste your time again, I know that other members have other commitments, and we will be having the plenary this afternoon. I will humbly request the DDG of Public Finance, Dr. Mampo Modise, and her team to make their presentation. I don't know how much time you need, Dr. Mampo.
Electronic Chairperson, thank you so much for inviting us. I think 20 minutes for a presentation and around 30 minutes for Q&A, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. We'll live with that. Thank you so much. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just switch on the video. Good morning, Chairperson and honorable members. Thank you so much for inviting us to this meeting this morning. I have my full team here that will be supporting me. I see that the presentation has been put on the screen. So basically, Chairperson, I think what we were trying to do when we were putting together this presentation is just to have some of the functions and trying to remind Parliament or the committee what the roles and responsibilities are. But because this is a different committee, I think I will get on to the presentation from slide 11, please, where basically what this does, Chairperson, it just gives the committee the background information of what the appropriation bill is, the structure of the bill, what the bill is about, and the parliamentary process. So that information the honorable members can have a look at it when they have time. So basically, Chairperson, I think the first slide that I wanted to deal with is the background. So when we came to the Parliament in 2020 October, we came with a proposal where we were looking at the finances of the country given the COVID and the spending thereof. We, as government, we as in cabinet through the Minister of Finance, of course, proposed that we have a fiscal consolidation. So what that meant, Chairperson, was that we had to propose some budget reductions in terms of how we stabilize the debt. So there were three basic principles that we had to look at. One was, how do we ensure that funding is available for the vaccines, but also how do we support the economy, which was the second one. And lastly, how do we then, in such an environment, consolidate the fiscal position? In the next slide, Chairperson, we're basically looking at how do we then implement the fiscal framework that was approved by Parliament in the MTBPS. So in this slide, Chairperson, is just the summary of what is in the 2021 budget, which is basically the continuation of the MTBPS, and here we were implementing the proposed reductions that took place. So basically here, Chairperson, what this slide says, it just shows you that in the budget document itself, the focus was narrowing the budget deficit, and we did this to stabilize the debt to GDP. There were different proposals, Chairperson, looking at the speed at which we consolidate, and in the MTBPS, the proposal was that the consolidation goes over 5 years instead of the 3 years that was proposed prior. So this is just for us to implement that. And then secondly, we had to make sure that we continue to provide support for the economy, especially the health service. We basically, without adding long-term spending pressures, and this basically meant that we had to reprioritize for this. And the other principle that we had to look at was, how do we then ensure that we improve the composition of spending? As you would see, Chairperson, the budget reductions are concentrated on the compensation of employees rather than capital investment. And we try to do this because we understand that growth is driven by infrastructure spend. So when we were doing these reprioritization, we tried to protect capital spending. Then, but Chairperson, with all of this, the risk remain is how do we as South Africa, and how do we globally deal with COVID? How fast are we going to vaccinate and all of that? So that remains the major risk to the fiscus. But the domestic issues that continue to be a risk would be, how do we deal with our ailing state-owned companies that require funding, but also we are in the new public sector wage bill negotiations, and depending on the outcome of those, it might result in some impact of the fiscus, of course. So those are some of the risks. In the next slide, basically will be, this is just the summary, Chairperson and honorable members, of the numbers, or how the numbers have changed. So basically for 2021, what we're looking at is the allocation, of course, but as you would know, we had a freeze, a break in terms of the skills development levy contributions, and that of course will lead to a decrease of close to 3 billion, which is 2.8 billion. We reduced the programs, the baselines for this year by 39 billion. In terms of programs, but for the wage bill overall, the proposed reduction is 26 billion. But as I said, Chairperson, we had to increase the spending for COVID-19. So the 15 billion basically would be, or it comprises of the money for the vaccines, but also the money for the provinces to deal with the possible third and fourth waves. And then we have other provisional allocations, Chairperson, of 11 billion. And basically this is the money that will be used to allocate for the Presidential Employment Initiative. We're in the process of evaluating the proposals, and once those proposals have been evaluated and the ones that qualify, allocation funding will be done. We also had to allocate, Chairperson, funding for the South African Revenue Services, which was 1 billion, and also proposed allocation for the land bank, which is 5 billion, but I'll get into that in the coming slides. On the next slide, Chairperson, we also wanted to show the committee that the underspending in departments has reduced significantly over the past couple of years. I mean, the only department that is showing persistent underspending would be cooperative governance and traditional affairs, but mainly these would be the conditional grants that are allocated to municipalities. And because sometimes they don't comply with the regulations in DORA, the transfers are withheld. But mainly the underspending will come from there. But for most of these departments, Chairperson, there's no longer significant underspending. So when we looked at these budget reductions, it was very difficult for us to protect all the departments because most of them are not underspending. So I will go into the implications of this, but basically these numbers just show that the fiscal consolidation that has taken place over a couple of years is starting to show in the numbers. And because previously how we used to do this, Chairperson, we would look at underspending programs, we look at programs that are growing much faster than inflation. We no longer have that room. That's why we had to look at across the board reductions. In the next slide, Chairperson, it deals with per department, and I just want to explain how one can read this table. So for example, in the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, last year, in the last year's budget 2020, we thought that what should be allocated to this department is 524.3 million. But in the appropriation bill now, we're proposing 70.3 million for this department. Then when we look at the share of reduction, basically we just took the 70.3 divide by the 454 so that we have a comparison across the departments, because one may think that 70 million is very small, but in relation to the budget of this department, that constitutes 15.5%. So for this department, Chairperson and honorable members, the biggest implication of these budget reduction, because it's a policy department, it would be filling of vacant positions. So they would have to now work even harder to try and work within what they have, but also free some of the critical positions that they would have otherwise filled if the budget reductions didn't take place. So mainly the departments that constitute higher share of reduction to their budget would be policy department, but also it would be the safety and security sector. So we're looking at correctional services, police, justice are part of those departments where the share of reduction is higher. But this is mainly, Chairperson, because these departments are compensation heavy, so they have a lot of people relative to others. So if the concentration of the budget reduction is in compensation of employees, then of course the numbers for this department will be impacted. But I think the biggest impact that we're going to see in this function group, which is safety and security, we're going to start looking at a widening of the different ratios, and we're also going to see some impact in terms of filling of critical positions. In the next slide is just a continuation per vote of these budget reductions. And here, as I said, we're looking at mainly the safety function group. But basically, the biggest implication that we also going to see in the defense force would be their inability to implement what was approved, which is the defense review. And this has been postponed over the years because of the budget reductions. In the next slide, these are just some of the departments. The next slide, please. And the next slide. And the next slide. And the next slide. Thank you. So, Chairperson, basically, in summary, without going in each and every department, the budget reductions as a share of total amount to 4.8%, but this is partially offset by the allocations that we had to make of 4%. So the departments that received funding, as I said, was the health department, where their budget is increasing by 3%. But Chairperson, just because health has received funding for COVID, it doesn't mean that they were not included when we looked at the overall budget reductions. So they still have other programs that are going to be impacted by these budget reductions, and we're looking at grants and, for example, the HIV and AIDS grant component was also reduced. In terms of the National Treasury, the biggest allocation there was for the land bank, which is about 5 billion, but also because the Treasury allocates funding for SARS, and we're proposing a 1 billion increase in SARS. It reduces the net implications, but Treasury as a department was also reduced, and it got its fair share of these budget reductions. And the last one will be the public enterprises Chairperson, where the allocation is 31 billion, and almost all of this money is for ESCOM. So money for ESCOM, it is provisionally allocated because we were not sure at that time what ESCOM needs, how they're going to deal with what is required in terms of stabilizing the entity. So in each year, we just allocate the funding that has been provisionally allocated. So this is not new money, but we're bringing it into the department's budget rather than having it as provisionally allocated. So this money has been approved in the previous budget reviews, Chairperson and honorable members. The next slide just summarizes then the
you are experiencing, I don't know if it's mine or yours, you're experiencing connectivity problem. And if you do, please, you can switch off your video and other members can open their videos. I see a hand there. Mampo, Dr. Mampo.
Chairperson, I think I'm gonna move to a different space because of the net.
Okay.
I hope this is better, Chairperson. I'm just gonna switch off my video for network. Is that fine?
It's fine. It's fine.
Thank you. Okay, so I was just saying that basically the core reasons or implications that we wanted to bring to the attention of the committee was that most of these policy departments and compensation heavy departments are going to struggle to fill the vacant positions. But I think what we also wanted to bring to your attention is the implications in the peace and security, where we're looking at inmate ratios that will be worsened from a norm of 1, from a norm of 1 to 5 to 1 to 7. We're looking at the population ratios for the police, instead of 1 to 220 people, we're looking at 1 police for 400 people, so that will be the implications. We're also looking at the structure of the force, where police usually would go and recruit young and physically active force and then put them into the internship program and then at the end employ them. But because of these budget reductions, that's going to be very difficult for them to do. As I said, the defense review has to be, the implementation of it will have to be postponed again. And also there will be a lot of increases in the case backlog, looking at justice and protection, justice and correctional services. But Chairperson, there's other implications for other departments, of course, where the transfers to public entities will be impacted. Here I'm looking at entities such as Sanral, PRASA, the National Aid Financial Scheme. I'm looking at entities such as the CCMA. So those public entities, of course, will be impacted with these budget reductions. But also, Chairperson, as you may be aware, we have several memberships like the IMF, the World Bank, the New Development Bank. With these budget reductions, of course, the membership may be impacted. But what this means is that, one, this is a good time to review all of these memberships and review the benefits that we get as a sovereign. But secondly, the departments that are responsible for these memberships will have to start thinking about negotiating longer payment structures rather than let's say, for example, we have to pay within 5 years. The department will have to negotiate that. Can we not pay over 7 years instead of the 5 years, just to deal with these implications? For some of the departments, the ICT and the infrastructure projects that have not started will have to be postponed. And also the ones that are already started, we might have to look at a longer period to finish them. But the implications here, Chairperson, would mean that the cost overruns may increase if we extend the time period for implementing of these projects. We had a lot of discussions in the Standing Committee, Chairperson, on the funding for State SA. And I think we are aware of these implications, but what we were trying to, explain to the committees that what we are worried about in terms of State SA, of course, we're worried about the budget reductions, but we're also worried about the pace at which they implement the census pilot, and also making sure that they do the census in this year, because funding is allocated for this year. And if they don't do the census in this financial year, the problem is that we will have to then look for new money to support State SA in the following year. So that was one thing that we were discussing. Then programs such as the PPWP Community Works, of course, will have to be reduced. So the number of people that are in these programs will have to be reduced. But at least in that instant, there was the 11 billion that I spoke about of the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, and that can, to some extent, augment some of the implications on this. We're looking at the below zero inflation increase in social grants. There has been a lot of outcry about the implications of this. But Chairperson, in the past, when we were reprioritizing, even when we had to find 56 billion for the fee-free education. We protected the social grants, and we did the best that we could to try and make sure that the consolidation doesn't impact social grants. However, Chairperson, we at a point where the amount that was needed for consolidation was so large that it was impossible for us not to look at the social grants. So the below inflation increase, it's not that Treasury or the cabinet doesn't care about poverty. It's the fact that if we don't consolidate now, the implications would be much dire in 2 or 3 years from now. So the implications of this we understand, but I think the core thing is we need to make sure there's funding for the vaccine and to deal with the pandemic rather than having a very tight budget. We also have to look at some of the conditional grants that will be impacted, especially in the health sector. But as I said, Chairperson, we are proposing funding for the Land Bank and EXCOM. In the next slide, please. So, Chairperson, the issue of the Land Bank is a bit complicated. So basically what we are proposing for the Land Bank is an allocation of 5 billion this year, 1 billion next year, and 1 billion the other year. However, what this means, we said that the funding for the Land Bank will have to be reprioritized from the existing baselines. So what this means is that when we come back in the MTBPS, the current budgets that are allocated to departments will have to be revised down to come up with the 5 billion for the Land Bank. So in the next slide, Chairperson and honorable members, I tried to show what the implication would be. So basically, I've put together the budget allocations for the different departments, and I've arranged them according to size. So basically what this means is if we had to look at the budgets for all the departments and take out the exact amount, exact share per department for social development, basically we would need a 1 billion. For cooperative governance, we'll need 500 million. So it goes on and it adds up to 5 billion. But it's difficult, Chairperson and honorable members, to just do an across the board reduction to get to 5 billion. However, the more departments we take out of the pot to find the 5 billion, it means the ones that remain in the pot will receive a much bigger share. So for example, in this scenario 2, I show that if you take out the biggest 5 departments from the pot, then the departments that are left, their share is much higher. So for example, if you look at health, if we include all departments, the share of health that will go for the Land Bank would be 319 million. But if we take out the top 5 departments, it means the share of the budget for health that will go to funding the Land Bank will increase to close to 1 billion, 756 million. Now, Chairperson, if you take out the top 10 and then you look at the implication, it's even worse. So basic education, if everyone is reduced by the same portion, it's 138 million. If you take out the first 5 big departments, the contribution increases to 327. If you take out the top 10, the increase, the contribution goes to 690 million. So Chairperson and honorable members, the reason why I am sharing this slide is so that you can appreciate the difficulty in selecting which departments will be impacted by the reductions, which ones will not. Because all departments are feeling the pressure and the services that they render will definitely be impacted by the current budget reduction. Now, if we have to fund the state-owned companies through reprioritization, which is the policy and the fact that we don't have funding, it means the same departments that are already struggling to implement and deliver services will have to suffer more to bail out these state-owned companies. So if you look at the implications for the land bank, I'm not saying this is what we're gonna bring, but when we reprioritize, depending on which department will be protected from this, it means the rest of the department will definitely fit a much bigger bill just to fund the land bank. In the next slide, Chairperson and honorable members, this is just this is just a request to amend 2 votes. So before we had environmental affairs, and the proposal was environment, forestry and fisheries, but the proposal is that they change the name to forestry, fisheries, and environment. And then in terms of the second vote, which is vote 37, is just a change from sports, arts and culture to just sport, arts and culture. So basically the change that we're requesting here is not sports with an S, but just sport. So this is just a slide that shows the request to amend the 2 votes. In the next slide, Chairperson and honorable members, this is just the special appropriation bill which the minister tabled in Parliament as well. And there's 3 departments here where we're requesting the committee to consider. So the first one would be an amount of 1.250 billion, and this was appropriated for the vaccine program because the Department of Health then reached bilateral agreements with the manufacturers of the vaccines, and we had to make sure that we allocate funding within the 2020-21 fiscal year. The second department where we're asking for consideration will be the Department of Small Development, where the request was 2.826 billion, and this amount was used for the extension of the 350 grant for the 2 months up to March, but the April money is in the appropriation bill, not in the special appropriation bill. The special appropriation bill was to cater for 2020-21 2 months that were not budgeted for. And then lastly, Chairperson, this is the Department of Public Enterprises, where the request basically is to amend. So in the previous appropriation bill, Chairperson, what we did was basically to put a condition that the 10.5 billion that will be allocated to SAA must be used for the business rescue purposes only. And this is also part of the business rescue, because when the Department of Public Enterprises presented their business rescue schedule, they had the subsidiaries included in there. But because of how it was written in the appropriation bill, the department couldn't disperse the funds for the subsidiaries. So basically here, we're asking for a correction in the conditions that we would have put for public enterprises to allow the money that was already budgeted for the subsidiaries to be dispersed to the subsidiaries. So this is not additional money that is required, and this is not a change in the mandate. This is just a legal way in which the department can allocate this funding, given the fact that in the appropriation bill, we were very strict in saying this must only be for the business rescue process. So basically, Chairperson, this is just amending the condition that we had in the appropriation bill so that the department can continue with the process of the business rescue, because supporting the subsidiaries was part of the request, and it is part of the 10.5 billion. I think, Chairperson, these are all the slides. This is just an explanation of the 10.5 billion that I just given to the honorable members. Chairperson, thank you so much for awarding us the opportunity to present. I think the team stands ready for questions. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thanks very much, Team Finance, Dr. Mampo, on behalf of Treasury. I now expecting members to raise their hands to indicate the willingness to debate or to have questions or comment or seeking clarity on the both presentations. I see Honorable Mkiva, Honorable Ocamp, Honorable Ryder. In that order, please. Honorable Mkiva and Honorable Ditoit, you are the fourth. Honorable Mkiva.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson, for the opportunity. Let me take this opportunity as well to greet you, as well as the members of the committee, as well as Team Treasury, and express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Mampo for the presentation. And many of the things indeed that the good doctor is raising are not new, given several presentations that relate to matters of appropriation and finance in general. I just want to ask a question that, given the state of affairs, because he's painting a picture which is not quite a good one, given the pressure and the extent to which our economy is affected by the outbreak and the interventions that we needed to do in order for us to mitigate those factors. Are we in a position in the next 3 to 5 years to turn the corner, given what has happened and given our expenditure pattern, which is increasing year on year, and yet in terms of our revenue generation, there's a decrease. What is, hello?
No, boo, volume.
Yes. So what is the plan in place to ensure that we have a turnaround strategy in a short to medium term, sort of? Are there any critical plans to really make the economic recovery plan to work to the extent that we will be able to turn around the situation and ensure that our deficit doesn't increase from one financial year to the other? I think, to me, that is the most critical thing that I would like to put to you. And then secondly, it goes without saying that the rural communities are subjected to a major strain, because when things like this happen, it hits hard on the poorest of the poor. And I would love, therefore, to see an intervention, a policy intervention that is going to ensure that even the grants that are meant for those people who are experiencing much strain, that those at least should not be reduced, rather they should be increased in perpetuity until such time that we see the turnaround that I am talking to. Otherwise, I think that from the point of view of the presentation, I am happy with the stated facts, except, of course, that it is a worrying factor that the finances of the country do not look quite good. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mkiva. Welcome, Honorable Ocamp.
Good morning, Chairperson. Thank you for the opportunity. Dr. Modise, last year when you spoke to us, you said that we are in trouble. I think that if we look at this thing this year, we are in deep, deep trouble. Dr. Modise, thank you for a thorough presentation. We always get a good presentation and an honest presentation from you, so thank you very much for that. There's a few points that I just want to get some clarity or some ideas of what the alternative planning would be. Let's start with labor. What will happen if no deal is struck, firstly, and what will happen if a deal is struck? Because there are no provisions made for that, and I can't see any provisions being made for that. So if a deal is struck and labor has got to be increased, where will that money come from, and what will the effects be that it will have on our budget as it is? Second point is COCTA. You said there that COCTA is continuously underspending. I know it might be a difficult question for you to ask, but we would like to know the reasons, or where is it that COCTA is underspending on a continuous basis? Then a very worrying factor is the lowering of the budget of police, and you also gave us the ratio of policemen versus the public. Now, the norm is 1 to 220 people. We are standing at 1 to 400 people. Now, in a country like South Africa, with the crime rate that we have got, I would really wonder whether that was even a remotely wise decision. What will the effect be to our budget and to our finances as a whole if crime keeps soaring? And surely with a budget like this and a ratio that's almost double what the norm is, surely we must expect that our crime will grow and grow and even might become totally out of hand, not that it is not already there. So what will the effects be, and are there anything that might be done in order for us to keep our police services strong and protect the people on ground level, especially in rural areas? We are sitting with a lot of farm attacks in our country. We are sitting with people in rural areas that has got basically no police station or policing available to them. And I think this might even further jeopardize that. The other, and maybe one of the biggest worrying factors for me, is the fact that there's only 6 billion rand that goes towards COVID vaccines. This is one of our biggest enemies that we've got at the moment. We need to get herd immunity as soon as possible. We see that all the experts all over our country and all over the world are telling us that if we are going to keep on vaccinating people at the same rate as we are doing now, we will hardly ever reach a herd immunity. We will always be stumbled by another wave. Shouldn't there be better planning? I mean, if you look at public enterprises, there's an increase of 87.2% going towards ESCOM. Again, gosh, people, I really think that we are driving a dead donkey, and we are thinking that this thing will win the July, and it will never win the July. We must really look at what we are doing. My question is, how much money that are not planned for might go into state-owned enterprises? And I know that that's a silly question, because if you knew that, it would have been in the planning, but we've seen so many times in the past that additional amounts go towards state-owned enterprises. And my question is here, what is the total amount of money that goes to state-owned enterprises for funding or recapitalization or whatever it's called there? And is there an amount that you have not budgeted for, but that you might have an idea of what it will be? Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. I know that was a mouthful, but I appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Ocamp. Honorable Ryder.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone else on the meeting. Chair, yeah, thank you. First of all, before I get into the discussion of the presentation, I'd like to just take issues with some of the things that you said in the beginning, because firstly, you said that there's plenary this afternoon. There is no plenary this afternoon, Chair. But the problem, the error that you made is not your fault. It can be squarely laid at the feet of the programming committee, who seem to not want to meet and have left us in confusion, which is part of the reason why our finance committee meeting was difficult yesterday, etc., etc. So, yeah, just through you, Chair, a side swipe at the programming committee and a request that we get some certainty and some decent planning for when we will sit and where. Chair, my second issue, and it relates to the comment that you made that the bill will be passed in the National Assembly on Friday. Chair, I find that comment quite distasteful, especially considering our role and the content of some of the debate speeches that we've had recently, and also the discussion that we had with the various professors and civil society recently, that says that, you know, we shouldn't just be rubber stamping the budget as it's put forward by Treasury. We are not victims of the budget. We are the ones that help to form it. And to say that it's going to be passed, and you know, the way that you said it was, well, you know, we all know that it's going to get passed. It shouldn't be passed in its current form, Chair, and we should be debating that. And you, as the chairperson of this portfolio committee, of the select committee, should be encouraging us to debate and make it an impact on this and change things. So, Chair, I found your comments actually quite distressing, and you know, to say that we expect it to be passed on Friday would have been an entirely different thing. But yeah, to just admit that Parliament's going to just rubber stamp it, I find that to be incredibly distressing and quite depressing, and I wonder why we're even doing the work that we're doing at times. So, Chair, yeah, consider me a bit cheesed off this morning. Chair, then I want to go to the presentation, and yes, Dr. Mampo, thank you very much, as usual, for bringing it down to us and into the detail. We saw the... Yeah, Bonnie, if you can mute, please.
Please close your mic.
Thank you. Great. Chair, so we were shown effectively what the impact of the bailouts is going to be. And Honorable Nkiva is quite correct, you know, to say it's quite depressing to see the impact that's going to happen on the poorest of the poor. Because if you look at the impact of those bailouts and you have a look what's being cut, there were comments that social grants are getting increased far below inflation rates. There's less money for EPWP. There's less money for all of these projects that are designed to help put food on the table for those that are really on the margins of society. And Chairperson, it's the people that we are here to protect. You know, we're not supposed to be here to protect the business executives that you know, are doing well. We're here to protect the people that rely on government. So again, we must be asking ourselves, should we be giving money to these big bailouts, Eskom, SIA, and the Land Bank, and taking money off the table for the poorest of the poor? So the issue of the Land Bank is obviously a difficult one, and there was a good demonstration of what the impact of the bailout for the Land Bank is going to be. Now, we had a good discussion yesterday on the Land Bank, and it's pleasing to note today, it would have been useful to have some of that information that we have today, would have been useful to have it yesterday, because obviously there's going to be an adjustment budget. So it answers my question about what's going to happen in the medium term. What's Treasury's commitment in the medium term to the Land Bank? So they've said that there's going to be an adjustment bailout, which is great. But if you have a look at the amounts further on, so we've got 5 billion and 2 and 2. Looking at the numbers that the Land Bank gave us yesterday, when they were talking about their book being around 36 billion, and impairments being, you know, more than 10% of that. So the money that we're trying to fill a hole. They're warning us that there's a bigger hole to come, because 13 or 16%, I can't remember exactly, of 36 billion is going to be more than the amount that we're appropriating over the medium term. So we're actually never going to catch up, and we're never going to take over if the appropriation for the Land Bank continues in the vein that it is. So actually we need to decide again, is the Land Bank going to work? Treasury indicates they don't have money. They're not planning to give it more money over the medium term. So are we saying that then other departments need to make sacrifices over the medium term so that we can fund the Land Bank and the good work that it does? Because I mean, you know, as we said, and again, it's quite strange agreeing with Honorable Nkiva twice in one day, but I mean, he made a point yesterday that the Land Bank is massively important and fulfills a really big role. But the problem is that there's no money to fill that role. And to see the sacrifices that have to be made and I really want to appreciate that slide that showed, what the impact is on the other departments just by giving the Land Bank the 5 billion that we need to give them now. And I mean, there's not really a choice by the looks of things. But the impact on the other departments is massive. And again, it's a case of balancing one need off against the other. And that brings me, Dr. Mampo, to the one question that I want to ask is about zero-based budgeting. And I know that's not a nice phrase that people like to hear, but it goes to the issue around reevaluating. So let's rather not call it zero-based budgeting. Let's talk it reevaluating existing programs and projects within departments. And here we come to again, Treasury. Let's pick on Treasury. So Treasury's increase is quite substantial, and when one breaks it down, a lot of it is justified. And yes, an extra billion to SARS is probably going to have a massive recoupment benefit. So that's probably a good thing. But if you have a look at the State Security Agency and SARS, I beg your pardon, Treasury accounts for the state security within their budget. When I asked the minister about, why is state security getting an increase when all of the other arms, security arms in the budget are getting a decrease, he couldn't really answer me. And he said, well, that's what I've been told to do. So it's a case of, hold on a second, are we properly re-evaluating the projects, the programs and the projects within each department? Again, I mean, we've seen it in the newspaper recently where SAPS is having a massive decrease in their budget to visible policing, and yet an increase to VIP protection, one of the other programs. So the point is there a decent, how are we doing with having a relook at the projects and programs within each department to reevaluate whether they are the right things to do at this stage? To budget a huge amount for a nice big cake is probably not going to be the right thing when people can't afford to put food on the table. So yeah, again, defense decrease. The decrease in the defense budget is something that I find particularly concerning, noting our regional instability that we've got at the moment. And the point is that we have the Defence Force crying out to us and saying, hold on a second, we don't have the money to maintain our equipment. We don't have the money to buy new equipment. We don't have the money to invest in new technologies, drone technology to start, patrolling our borders, etc., etc. Things that would really work and actually cut costs in the long run. But we don't have the money to do that. And yet the Defence Department is once again putting forward an organogram that is unfunded. So they're going to need to steal money out of one of their other programs to fund their bloated staffing arrangement. Something that's quite common across many departments and state-owned entities. So yeah, really a drill down into a little bit of how the money is being spent. I understand that would probably take all day for us to go through, but just some broad comments from Treasury would be quite good on that, please. I'm a little disappointed as well by the COGTA underspending that was highlighted, and I'd just like a little bit more information on that. And there was a throwaway comment that may be due to conditional grants. If we can have a little bit more guidance on that, because COGTA underspending is problematic. We've spoken a lot about local government, the problems at local government, how local government is not working. Where's that underspending happening? If you can maybe just expand on that a little bit. There was no comment about the elections, budget for the elections and the census, which both planned for this year. And I know that both have been budgeted for. Is it sufficient? And is it still expected that those things will be, or those costs will be incurred during this financial year? There was an interesting comment as well about membership fees to international organizations, which I'd like a little bit more expansion on, please, from Treasury. And not exclusively, but if you can include into that the cost of belonging to the BRICS Bank, as opposed to the benefit of the BRICS Bank, because as far as I'm concerned, BRICS Bank, and perhaps Honorable Karim can assist us a little bit here, is more institutional knowledge, but BRICS Bank was around to help specifically with times of tight financial flows, etc. What's the current status there, and what's it costing? Is it a more of a cost than a benefit, or are we seeing some benefits out of the BRICS Bank? SIA Business Rescue was mentioned, and the question that I want to ask there, the money that was appropriated was specifically for the business rescue and for them to deal with their obligations, their legal obligations that they needed to deal with to make sure they kept afloat. Now, we've heard many reports that there are many people within SIA that have not been paid. I know the pilots are one group, but there's various groups that are claiming that they haven't been paid the full amount, there's amounts outstanding, etc., etc. And it appears that SIA has not actually used all of their money to do things like paying their staff first, which is probably one of the things that you know, any responsible business owner does, is it deals with the staff. And people are committing suicide over financial concerns. We've read in the press. We've seen some issues. So if we can just hear, you know, has SIA used the bailout properly, and who's monitoring whether they're using that bailout to pay for the right things, or whether they're using it to pay massive fees to the business rescue practitioners? Chair, my last comment, if I may. We've seen the president talking about an infrastructure-led recovery. The listing again that showed which departments may get hit if we need to take the 5 billion out of the budget, which department, and you know, if one looks at that, one sees that, for example, public works and infrastructure doesn't fit into that top 10. Are we really prioritizing infrastructure in order to lead us out of the slump that we're in, or are we not? Because the fact is that you know, yeah, essentially, can I just summarize my question? How does this budget tie in with the president's state of the nation speech? Is there a match, or is there a total mismatch? I must be honest, I don't see a match at all in what the president has promised us and what the budget is delivering. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Titoit.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, it's always a challenge to speak after Honorable Ryder, because he focuses on quite a few of the points that we have similarities on. Big concerns for me also is the safety and state security budget that has decreased tremendously. I want to know if National Treasury can perhaps elaborate on support that's given to the Development Bank. I might have misread it, but if they could just direct me in a direction with regards to financial support given to the Development Bank, since the Development Bank as well as the Land Bank work hand in hand with regards to government's land restitution projects and so forth. Yes, referring to yesterday's presentation, what we got from the Land Bank, it's obvious that they do not want to slow down with the funds being availed, although they do not have it at this moment, to provide assistance for upcoming farmers and for people that will be getting land according to them, in spite of the fact that there's not a drop left in the fiscus to provide that. And then with the revenue base that is shrinking, how are we going to plan and go about to keep on assisting state-owned entities? Everyone touched on state-owned entities, but isn't the time here, and aren't we forced and basically placed in a corner to definitely look at privatizing state-owned companies? Obviously, if we refer to Sasol is very successful. They have a large employment base at this stage, and it's generating funds that's contributing to the fiscus. So I think that it's high time that that must be looked at as a matter of urgency for privatizing the state-owned companies. If National Treasury can maybe say, let's say, for instance, in the next 2 years, we manage to privatize state-owned entities, what impact would that have on the financial burden, and what will we be able to do with the funds that we are not using for debt servicing costs at this stage? I think that would be a turnaround strategy to definitely look at. And then Mr. Mboweni, in the previous engagement that we had, mentioned that he fears the third wave. And I mean, obviously it is here now. Luckily, when the president spoke to the country, he just put us in a mild lockdown. But this thing will escalate. It's evident from all the other presentations that we received that the health sector is not at all ready to accommodate a third wave, and the stricter implications might follow. Yes, if Treasury could definitely just give me feedback with regards to security and police, how we can go about to provide more funds for them, and then the privatization of state-owned companies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Titoit. Ntate Mletsane.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me join my colleagues to acknowledge the presentation. Colleagues covered me in some of the questions. I just want to find out the clarity from Dr. Mampo and her colleagues. On the issue of NEFSAs, universities, and TVET colleges, was there no ways of trying to avoid to touch the budgets of those the three that I've mentioned? Because my worry is, for the wise country that needs to improve itself, it must invest in human resources. Now, touching the budget of NEFSAs, universities, and TVET colleges is going to deny more youth to access the tertiary education, especially those who are coming from the poor background. It's going to be a problem because already that budget, it's not enough as we speak. So touching it, it means it's going to make matters worse. At the same time, we are sitting with a high number of youth unemployment. So if now more youth they're not going to get an opportunity of going to tertiary, it means that in the long run is going to increase the number of unemployment of youth. So is there no mechanism of avoiding to touch that budget, so that at least, even if it's not enough, but it is able to cover a certain number of youth, so that they are able to get a tertiary education? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Ntate Mletsane. Honorable Karim.
Sorry, Chairperson, I'm having some problems, as you can gather, but I'll switch off my video if I have to, but I'm going to be very brief. Firstly, I just want National Treasury to respond. I think we all agree, National Treasury and no less, that a very significant step forward in dealing with our current challenges would be if we got economic growth going. Now, I saw in the media, I'm sure others did too, I don't know if it's OECD or IMF, but the projections are that we will only return to our pre-COVID growth rates, which were abysmal anyway, in 2025, well past the other developing countries and peer developing countries as well. What is National Treasury's response to that? It was in the media, Chairperson, in the last 72 hours. And I can't recall exactly which multilateral organization had said that. But the second thing too is, we are absolutely desperate for jobs. And it's not clear to me why we are reducing the funding for public works programs. Now, obviously, all of us, we're not populous, most of us at least, and all of us, well, most of us, almost all of us, I don't know what the appropriate term is, understand, obviously, acutely understand how difficult things are how limited the budget is, how little room there is to maneuver. So when we raise these things, we don't raise it like believing that there's a huge pot of money out there. So the question really is National Treasury prioritizing properly? In other words, if you have this limited pool of money, it doesn't necessarily follow that the choices National Treasury proposes to us are necessarily valid. So, why can't we de-emphasize funding for other areas and retain funding for the jobs creation sector? Thirdly, Mr. Ryder raises the point, Chairperson, that you said the budget will be passed. As I understood it, you weren't being heretical or blasphemous or, outrageous or anything. As I understood what you said, that's the deadline for the budget to be passed in the NA because of the sequencing following that process for us as the NCOP, as determined by the framework in the Money Bills Act. Now, a budget can be passed with amendments. It can be passed without any amendments. It can be rejected. But whatever the decision, it'll presumably be done on Friday. That's the point you're making. Now, we have discussed endlessly, and there are no answers to this. You and I and others who are around, well, aren't any others, but you and I and those on that side, Makolo is the only one I can think of, know how difficult it was to amend the Money Bills Act. Across political parties, there was more or less an acceptance. And we're not going to cover the ground we covered already at some length in the 2-day budget workshop we had, NCOP budget oversight workshop we had, I think, at the beginning of this quarter. So I think that basically this matter should be discussed, in a structured way. I think in the Finance Committee or the Appropriations Committee, it matters not because we are both one committee. But since the Finance Committee is responsible for legislation, then maybe it should be dealt with the majority of the ordinary legislation. Then maybe it should be dealt with there. But there are formidable obstacles in terms of, in the case of finance, Section 8.5. But we'll come back to this point that I don't think we're ever going to agree on. We have made many changes to the budget. The only difficulty is that you have to go to Treasury to effect it via a minister's letter, because we don't have the capacity to meet all those requirements. Neither the staff nor, let's start with me, as the most experienced perhaps, because I chaired the committee in the last 5 years. I don't have the capacity to do all those balances. So there are those constraints. But when one says, as a chairman member, the budget will be passed on Friday, it doesn't necessarily mean without a single change. And it doesn't necessarily, and does suggest, which is perfectly reasonable, and it's we're not going to kick the whole budget out. We're not going to leap from, the process we've had until now to immediately rejecting an entire budget. That would be bizarre in the current situation of COVID-19. So, I don't think one should make too much about what you said, Chairperson. But where I agree with Dennis, and it's something we've been discussing as the ANC, and we've put on the agenda, we're waiting for the NA committee to process this, further changes that are required. Because in constitutional terms, as we all know, we have the power to reject a budget entirely. But at this stage, what we should be doing is exercising our power to have a greater say on the prioritizations. There we can do much more, I think, in saying no to this. But remember, we also have to consult with the relevant select committees. You see, if we're going to say that take the money from this section of human settlements to another section, well, you can't just do that. You have to confer with the Human Settlement Select Committee. On the other hand, if you're saying take the money from, let's say, Foreign Affairs, DIRCO, which really, in my view, is an area where you can extract a lot of money from. I mean, look at the media reports recently about the amount of money we're wasting, about properties we have that are underutilized or unused. I mean, it's really, it's an old story, Chairperson. It's been around for many years. Like this endless story about, you know what? As ANC members, we should be leading this thing. It's not something that's party political here. This thing about, yes, we're doing an audit public works. That started in 1996, Chairperson. 1995, 1996, that audit. And until 5 years ago or so, I think they haven't completed an audit. That is unconscionable, really, apart from being bizarre. Secondly, on the matter of DIRCO, I really think their Chairperson, we must be tough in our report, really. I mean, we have wonderful Pelelani Dlomo here. I really think in our report, we must pick up what's being said in the media and urge Treasury to look into taking money away from DIRCO and putting it elsewhere. I mean, DIRCO is a very, very vulnerable area because there is so much there that's not being used, underutilized. Chairperson, we can be strategic and tactical. Take 2 or 3 areas and then engage with those committees. Before the MTBPS comes up, let's engage with the DIRCO committee on our side. And then they must engage with their partners on the NA side. We need the money. The country needs the money. DIRCO is the one area we can get it. And let's think of other areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, honorable members. Before I allow Team Finance to respond to what you have raised, honorable members, I also want to comment on a few issues. And let me start by thanking you, Honorable Ryder, by correcting me that there's no sitting this afternoon. That was my understanding according to the program, that we all knew. You were advantageous enough to know before that the sitting is no more there. Thank you for that. On the issue of what I've said, and thanks, Honorable Karim, for clarifying that. There might be a problem in terms of the wording that was given, but it's practically legal that Friday is the due date. And as I said that the NA will be passing the bill, I'm being positive. I don't want to be negative. Whether they amend, they pass it with amendment or whatever, that is another story that will happen on Friday. And I'm being positive because I want the processes to go in what we are being mandated here to make sure that we avail money for government to operate. The issue of the rubber stamping, I think we all share this. We don't want to be the people who are responsible to rubber stamp and be pulled around and told what to do and what not to do. I have been kind enough to give you unlimited time. Usually we give ourselves 3 minutes for discussions. And I think, Honorable Ryder, you had enough time to can engage. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing today. We're criticizing, we're asking questions, and depending on the report that will be presenting or will be finalizing next week, let me not say adopt, but the intention is to adopt at the end of the day after the discussions. So there's no one who is expecting us to rubber stamp to be those useless MPs who cannot exercise their responsibilities, which is understandable. We get our mandate from the Constitution, and we cannot allow anyone to make us to do that. I just want to clarify that for Honorable Ryder, as he challenged what I said at the beginning. I have few issues. I'm going to left the issues that I've identified. Most members have spoken to them. The issue of the underspending, Dr. Mampo and Team Finance, Team Treasury. The issue of the underspending of COGTA. I think we've been complaining, we've been raising this issue of underspending, the status of the municipalities. And if COGTA is underspending, make us understand where are they underspending. And you also, if I remember well, you said as a result, the money is being withheld or because of the underspending on the conditional grants. Can you help me with that? Because the municipalities are suffering. They are complaining they don't have enough financial resources, even though we also criticize that in terms of the human resource, they don't have relevant, capable, skilled human resource. But the financial resource, is it because of that reason that they are underspending? Because the public or the citizens, they are expecting the municipalities to give those services to them. And this is the very important sphere of government, because they are at the face value, at the face point of giving services to the communities, and we expect them to give quality services. The issue of the stats SA. I don't know if I heard you well, Dr. Mampo. You said there's an engagement, or maybe the misunderstanding or whatever, that you have budgeted for census to be done this year. There is funding, and it looks like that is not in the plans of the Stats SA. And if Stats SA is not utilizing that funding, that money, or doing the census this year, then it's going to inconvenience you in terms of your budgeting. Please clarify that, and let's understand, because if there is budget and there's work that needs to be done and they don't want to do it, make us understand why, or make me understand why they don't want to do it this year, even though there's funding available to them. The last thing that I want to question, on slide 24, you spoke when you were presenting the reductions in terms of the budget votes. The naming of the department, I'm not sure in terms of human settlement. Is it not changed? Is it still called human settlement? Because when you went to slide 25, I saw human settlement, but I also saw water and sanitation. I thought this is one department. Or are you saying in this department, which is one, human settlement, water and sanitation, there's this amount that has been allocated specifically to focus on human settlement, and the other one is budgeted to focus on the wing of water and sanitation. I'm just concerned about this because my constituency, where I come from, there's a huge problem in terms of water. I've heard what happened and seen. I've heard on the media of the concerns and the noise that was done in Gauteng about the issue of water. We have been living with this situation for years, and if the department is not changed like this, I just want to be helped so that I know where to go if I want an intervention. But the issue of water and sanitation, and more especially water in where I come from, Dr. J.S. Moroka and Tembisile Hani municipality, there's a huge problem of water, and we're living under such circumstances. Let me leave it at that. In other questions that I've identified, members have covered me. Dr. Mampo and the team, I think members will get the second bite on depending on the responses if we still have time, because I don't want to be accused that I'm not giving members enough time to interrogate or engage on the bills. Dr. Mampo and the team.
Thank you, Chairperson. You know, when one comes to this committee, you need to have your ducks on the road, because the questions that are imposed on us are those that make you run to go look for your budget review. So I have a full team here that is going to assist me, but let me start by the economic growth questions, Chairperson and honorable members. I think what we are basically saying is that it's going to take us several years to go back to the pre-crisis level numbers that we have. So in the budget review, basically we have GDP recovering to 3.3 in 2021, but basically very moderate growth in 2023. We have 1.6%. So the recovery, or the mild recovery that we see, Chairperson, is driven by the fact that when we did the budget review, there were three things that we looked at. So the first thing was, how do we fast track the reforms that we need as the country? So in Chapter 2 of the budget review, we go into detail in explaining these reforms and the implications that these reforms will have in the growth of the economy, and the fact that there's what we refer to as Operation Vulindlela, which is a unit within Treasury and the presidency that will deal or will drive the reform agenda, is one way to try and boost economic growth. We are very clear in explaining that although these reforms are urgent and we need to implement them now, the impact of these reforms will only be seen not in the current year, but over the MTF. So basically the recovery that we have in the budget review will be determined by the pace and the timing of the implementation of these reforms, because the longer you delay in implementing the reforms, of course, you won't get your growth outcomes. The second issue, Chairperson, that we looked at was tax revenue, or how the revenue is, or how taxes can impact on the economy. So what we've realized is that you can tax as much as you can, but it doesn't mean that you will get the funding that you need. And the multipliers between taxes and expenditure, we also had to look at. So what the decision was, or what we are proposing in this book, is that firstly, we don't increase any personal income taxes, because people are already suffocating because of the pandemic. The second issue was that in the MTBPS, we penciled some money that we were going to collect through increasing taxes, and that amount we took out because we realized that we have been giving companies some relief because of COVID, so you can't really tax the companies that you were already assisting. The only type of tax that we increased was on sin taxes, that would be mostly alcohol and tobacco. So even if we look at the tax structure, we think that what we're proposing in the budget is a pro-growth tax structure. Then the third element that we looked at in order to try and achieve this growth was the composition of spending. So when we did the budget reductions, Chairperson and honorable members, what we looked at was how do we protect infrastructure vis-a-vis current spending. So the reduction in the compensation of employees suggests a salary freeze across the 3 years in the MTEF. But also what we also did was to make sure that we protect infrastructure. So the capital transfers and infrastructure projects are growing by CPI. So we didn't reduce the infrastructure. If you look at the slides that shows the different departments, you will realize that most of these departments that drive infrastructure, their reductions are much less than the other departments. So, for example, Chairperson, if you look at transport, the total reduction is 3.5% compared to a department such as planning, where the reductions were 15%. So basically, what we tried to do was to make sure that the departments that are implementing infrastructure, that component of infrastructure was protected from the budget review. So those were the three elements that we tried to, that we thought by implementing those the way we did will help us achieve the growth estimates that we have here. But I think, Chairperson, without fail, the risk will remain in terms of implementing some of these measures. But that's where the thinking is. In some of the, I'm gonna let the team deal with most of these questions, and I'll come in when they are done in case they've missed something. But Chairperson, let me clarify the Status A issue. So it is not that Status A does not want to, to do the census. It is beyond their control. So the last year they were supposed to start with the pilot. Now because of COVID, they couldn't really do the piloting. So it meant so last year we allocated 800 million for the pilot. So because they couldn't do it last year, they are asking for a rollover for this year. Now, Chairperson, what it means is that they're planning to do the pilot in July. It means that they will have to do both the pilot and the actual census in this coming year because funding is allocated for this year. Now, for the full census, we allocated to around 2.2 billion. If they don't use the 2.2 billion in this year, that amount will reduce the budget deficit, but it doesn't take out the fact that we still need to do a census. If a census then it is done in the following year where there is no allocation for it, it means we will have to go look for 2 billion in other departments that we're gonna use for the census. So the reason why I was bringing this up is that every department has challenges. Let's say has challenges in terms of the number of filling up the vacant positions and doing some of these surveys. But the biggest risk that we have identified as Treasury is whether they will be able to do the census in this year. Because if they can't, and there's of course justifiable reasons why they can't do the census, it means next year this will become a spending pressure. So we will need to reprioritize to find the 2 billion that we need to deal with. In terms of the wage negotiations, there's been a couple of questions there, but basically what this means is that because Parliament has approved the fiscal framework and also the division of revenue, any deviations resulting from the wage negotiations means we will have to reprioritize the funding. So what becomes a problem, Chairperson and honorable members, is that you have to look at the funding that is not committed. So one of the funding that is not committed yet will be funding, let's say, it's just an example, the Presidential Employment Initiative. That funding is just provisionally allocated. If the wage negotiations or the agreement is much more than what we can afford in the system, it means we have to look at programs like that in order to serve, or in order to augment the wage negotiations. We also will then be forced to look at other programs such as the ones that we were protecting, which will be infrastructure, to try and augment the increases in the wages, which defeat the purpose of ensuring that the composition of spending is more tilted towards infrastructure. So of course, depending on the outcome of these negotiations, there will be an impact on the composition of spending. But because the fiscal framework has been approved, it means we will have to look at within the existing baselines of departments to try and augment for this. Can I please ask Vuyelwa, then Tepiso, then my team, to deal with the rest of the questions? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is Vuyelwa Vumentlini, the DDG for International and Regional Economic Policy. My responses will be in regards to the new development bank. An honorable member did ask what's the amount of money that needs to be paid. According to the agreement, we will be doing our 7th and final installment to the bank on the 3rd of January 2022 to the tune of $350 million US. Now, it largely depends again on in terms of what has been budgeted for and what needs to be paid. We normally, again, guided by what happens in the movements in the exchange rates for now, but we may be good to go, although there are some pressures that we are seeing, because the New Development Bank is not the only MDB that we are a member of and that we have to pay subscriptions to. We also have the African Development Bank as well as the World Bank, which both of them have gone through the recapitalization process, and therefore there are some spending pressures there. In terms of the use of these banks or the benefit to the South African economy, it's got a lot to do with funding for infrastructure, and very recently the response to the COVID pandemic, of which we did get the loans both from the AFDB as well as the New Development Bank to that effect. However, we still have our own portfolio that is particularly just for infrastructure spend that is there, where a lot of our SOEs have received funding from these institutions, and that is something that we need to be a little bit more robust on in terms of accessing those funds, because the terms that the funds are provided for are quite reasonable and attractive versus what you find in the market. Thank you very much. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Chair, through you, I will continue as guided by Dr. Madise. My name is Tim Mahludi. I'm the head of Asset and Liability Management within. We'll deal with on the SOCs. Chair, if you don't mind, because this network is a bit finicky, I just thought I should put video on to introduce and then go off video. Thank you very much. Chair, maybe to just contextualize the numbers on the cost benefit of the funding from the international financial institutions as started by Vuyelwa. Just to put it in numbers, for example, a loan that is 30 years with 5-year grace period comes to about just under 2% in terms of the interest cost. If I have to go to the market and issue a same amount of funds and also tenor in the capital markets, that can easily get to about 5 to 6%. So overall, over that period, every year you're saving about 3 to 4% in interest cost. And we know that the debt service cost is one of the fastest growing expenditure line item, and therefore the benefit of being able to borrow from the multilaterals has really come in handy, especially during this time where, one, the cost of borrowing has gone very high because of the risk aversion in the market, where investors are placing a huge risk premium on the funds that they are lending, given the risks that are emerging. So we've definitely seen that benefit, and we will continue to tap on these financial resources to reduce our interest bill burden as well. And Chair, going to Honorable Ocamp, I wanted to have an understanding of the past financial support for state-owned companies, and also, what is likely to happen in the future. We have provided the numbers in Table 8.2 of Budget 2020, but if we update it to the numbers that have recently come through for Land Bank and SAA, over the period of 2009 to about 22-23, holding everything constant, the amount that has been provided to state-owned companies is about 329 billion. Is this the end? No, Chair, this is not the end. There is a very high likelihood of SOCs continuing to require bailouts from the state. And this is on the back of the deterioration in their financial position, historical, obviously exacerbated at this point by the COVID pandemic. And most of these entities have government guarantees. And unfortunately, if you look at the financial support of the past that has been granted, even currently, most of it is actually going to service debt. There is no money that is provided to state-owned companies for them to, expand their projects or infrastructure. In most of these bailouts, it has been to protect the fiscus from realizing guarantees. Unfortunately for the state, the exposure in terms of guarantees is over 400 billion. And if the state fails to pay a guaranteed debt, it will trigger the entire 400 billion in a period for the state to pay. And that is why you find that it is not an option in most cases, but it is a gun to our heads to make sure that we safeguard the entire budget, because the claims on the guarantees are the first claim to the National Revenue Fund. Before we pay salaries and grants, we will need to pay our debt obligations to lenders. And unfortunately, that has been the case. Going forward, these guarantees have realized in most cases, and they continue to put pressure on the fiscus. And that is why, Chair and honorable members, it doesn't make sense to continue granting guarantees to state-owned companies that are not able to fund these guarantees. If anything, it's really indirect recapitalizations or deferred recapitalizations, as we've seen. And when it comes into the system, because they don't go through a budget process, they really disrupt the budget process. They also undermines the integrity of the process that you are undergoing through right now, where you are questioning the kind of prioritization that is being made in order to fund these entities that are relying on the state. So there is a high likelihood that we will see these bailouts. And unfortunately, we won't have a choice, because most of those is guaranteed debt. Honorable Rider, yes, we had a very good discussion yesterday on Land Bank, and unfortunately, my response has not changed. National Treasury, as a shareholder, will make presentations to the process that is led by Dr. Mampo Modise and submit the bids as a shareholder of Land Bank. However, all these bids will have to be evaluated together with the other priorities, and to the extent that government is willing to make these trade-offs, then further support would be extended to those objectives that government sees as strategic and important for the government. So at this point, National Treasury cannot make a commitment of support to the Land Bank over the medium term. However, we do recognize the fact that with the current default position, Land Bank would not be able to access the markets, one. Two, Land Bank is in a position where they are re-establishing the development and transformation mandate, and that also would require support from the state for the Land Bank to be able to support emerging farmers who, as we know, the risks at that level are very high, and that's why you don't see your commercial banks playing a role there. And there's definitely a role for government to play in terms of development and transformation. On the SAA Business Rescue Plan, I think here the shareholder would be in a better position, the Department of Public Enterprises, to indicate whether the money is spent on the right things as they have presented to Cabinet, and also the monitoring thereof and how this money is being allocated in the various activities that were outlined by the business rescue practitioners. So, Chair, I would not delve in there. I think at an appropriate time, perhaps you could call the DPE to come and engage on how this money is being spent. Honorable Dutoy, support given to the Development Bank. The Development Bank, I think, is doing what is expected of it. I mean, at the core of the Public Finance Management Act, it requires state-owned companies to generate sufficient financial resources from their operations to meet obligations to employees, tax authority, the public, and also to their debt lenders. So this is actually what PFMA envisaged a state-owned company to be. Unfortunately, they are not at that state, and they are not able to meet their obligation. And it has become a norm that government must then pay salaries of state-owned companies, government must pay the lenders. But in its original inception and conceptualization of state-owned companies, these are companies that are supposed to meet their own obligations. And therefore, DBSA has not come to Treasury and requested any bailouts at this point. What they've come to request the statutory authorization, either borrowing limits and so forth, so that they're able to conduct their business as required by the Public Finance Management Act. So I'm not sure whether Honorable Dutoy, maybe she can follow through and with the question, but with regard to what we have received and how the company is doing, it is able to meet its obligations. Honorable Dutoy, you spoke about privatization of SOCs. I think you'd recall some few years back, I mean, a lot of frameworks were developed, and one particular one would be the private sector participation framework that was endorsed by Cabinet and actually being tried out currently. Maybe the timing is a bit lost. Very difficult to get partners into entities that are failing. If anything, you might actually have to pay them to take out these entities from our hands. But there is a framework. I know that SAA, through this the BRP process, they're also looking at bringing in a strategic equity partner into the business. And I think and encouraging that would help, because government, as the only shareholder right now, it's proving to be very difficult, especially with the stance currently where every entity is strategic and important, which tells you that it is almost impossible to prioritize any, because we've prioritized all of them as important, which, given the financial constraints that we're experiencing, it's very difficult to see how we are going to really cut this suit to fit the cloth that we have. There are also issues around business models, Chair, the funding models, cost structure. I mean, some of them you would swear they're running HR departments. Their cost of employees to their total cost to their revenues does not make sense at all. And there is no business that can be run that way. Rationalizing, merging of these entities, all that work is provided. Selling of some of the SOCs, getting rid of non-core assets and have them in operations as well, and have SOCs focus on the core mandates that have been given to them, I think becomes extremely important. And currently there's really no overarching strategy or vision, and that is why we quite hopeful that the process that the president has started would help, because right now every minister would tell you how important and strategic their entity is, and you don't really get a full perspective in terms of these SOCs and also the kind of direction and which ones are strategic. So we are hoping, Chair and honorable members, that through this presidential state-owned enterprise council would help to reposition and repurpose some of these SOCs so that they're able to contribute to the social and effective transformation of the country in an effective manner, and also strengthen the framework for SOCs, because it requires that kind of leadership at a president level, to be able to make these difficult choices regarding what should stay, what should not, what should be merged, what should be allowed for private sector participation. And through this process, there should be a long-term overarching strategy that is developed and that is able to assist us in this process, so that it is not biased by which department is able to, present more or make the most noise in terms of the SOCs, but it's more strategic. It has an economic basis that supports why it should be the way it is. And lastly, Honorable Eunice, yes, I think prioritization is going to be key. When we bring as Treasury what we think should be prioritized, I think, as I explained yesterday, it goes through various processes that could shape that prioritization. Firstly, the medium-term expenditure committee of DGs, Ministers' Committee on the Budget, Cabinet, and ultimately Parliament. So there are checks and balances. We give it an initial step based on what we understand, but ultimately it is, the choices of Cabinet and overall Parliament once these are approved in the budget. But I agree, I think prioritization is quite critical when we do not have unlimited resources, and that is the state that we find ourselves in. I'll pause the chair so that if there are, or maybe, no, I think Mampo's team should still come and assist with some of the questions, and then they'll hand back to yourself. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you, honorable members and colleagues. My name is Rendani. I will attempt to deal with some of the questions raised by Honorable Ocamp and Honorable Ryder. The first question was on police, and allow me to paraphrase Honorable Chair. What is it that the cluster is doing to cope with the cuts, with special reference to police? Let me start at the cluster level. There are various initiatives that departments are doing, some of which it's sharing of resources. And again, there's a strategy that talks to the revamp of the criminal justice system. Things like a consideration of modernization of the criminal justice system so that they can cope with the budget cuts. And again, also to consider alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, rather than looking up all the convicts. For example, you've got people who are in prisons at the moment because they can't afford 100 Rand, 200 bail, and yet they've committed petty crimes. So what are the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that can be considered to reduce overcrowding in prisons? As in one of the slides, you might have seen the worsening ratio in correctional services, staff to inmates. So coming specifically to the police, with regard to the worsening ratio, there are also initiatives that the police are doing in terms of a restructuring and reorganization of the department, with an intention of prioritizing frontline staff, some of which will be moved to the station level from the center, like for example, head office, in favor of frontline. So this is one of the initiatives that the departments are doing. It's not an easy conversation that we are having as a result of these budget cuts. I mean, we are protecting infrastructure, and yet we're cutting other items, in this case, it's compensation of employees. And this also brings me to the next question raised by Honorable Ryder, the concern raised on the funding for the Defense Force. The funding for the Defense Force will continue having discussions with the department. And this has been going on for quite some time now, I think since 2016. Everything emanates from Section 200 of the Constitution. That's where they derive their mandates. That talks to protecting and defending the Republic, including its territorial integrity. And the biggest elephant in the room is their compensation of employees budget. The solution doesn't necessarily lie in pumping in additional funding. Yes, there could be a case for additional funding given what the defense review says. But again, we must also have try to have some efficiencies within their budgets, of which now currently we are in discussion regarding their compensation for employees budget. It is not only in relation to their compensation of employees, we also look at the revenue side. For example, flowing from Section 200, what is it that we want our defense force to do? And again, what are those services that departments assisted by the defense force needs to pay for? So we're having those discussions as a way of supplementing the budget of the defense force. But again, I must also emphasize this point that the biggest elephant in the room is a compensation of employees, and this is work in progress. We're in discussion with them so that we derive some efficiencies within their own budget. I'll end here for now. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and honorable members. This is Julia de Bruin. I'll be answering the question related to NSFAS, the universities and TVETs in pretty much the same way as the colleagues have done before. So in terms of fiscal consolidation, the principles were we were going to reduce COE and we were going to save infrastructure spending. So all the allocations for NSFAS, TVET colleges and universities are transfers. And so the cuts came down heavily on them, as it did for all the other transfers like social grants. Of course, I would have wanted to save those three institutions because they're in my portfolio. But that was the fiscal consolidation principles that Cabinet agreed to. In discussions with the department, we said, well, you are also able to reprioritize within what you have if you wish to save, so to speak, any one of those institutions. And so that was the conversation that was had. They came to Cabinet, Cabinet approved some reprioritization within the sector, which enabled them then to save NSFAS, but they had to then take money from infrastructure at TVETs and infrastructure at universities and some of the specialized programs at universities. And that's the nature of what fiscal consolidation is about, honorable members. So if you ask anyone of public finance, my colleagues that are sitting here, we can all tell you we would have wanted to have saved so many programs. But because Cabinet approved fiscal consolidation, this is the outcome that we have. So in terms of higher education and training, what Cabinet did ask the technical staff to do at the department and at the Treasury was to come back to them with a plan, because they would need to change policy if they wanted to change anything in the department's budget. There's no more reprioritization that can be done without seriously affecting the outputs of TVET colleges and universities. Thanks, honorable members.
Anyone from Team Treasury, Mampo?
Yes, Chairperson. Dr. Bletch, are you in the meeting? Anyways, Chairperson, let me just deal with the health question. So I think there was one where basically there was, the question was about the allocations that we did for COVID, whether it would be sufficient or not. And the 6 billion was not sufficient. I think in the budget, we specify that to augment the funding for the COVID vaccine, we will look at the contingency reserve, and we allocated an extra 7 billion in the contingency reserve just to deal with the cost pressures that we can get in terms of COVID. I think the problem we have is not the funding available for COVID, but the supply of vaccines that is available and the speed at which we're procuring the vaccines. So in terms of funding has been allocated, and the Department of Health has not utilized all of the funding that we allocated to them. The reason why we would use the contingency reserve to put some of the money is because at the time when we were doing the budget, we were not sure about the cost, and it's according to the PFMA, you don't just allocate funding that doesn't have purpose. So we will be working, we're always working with the Department of Health to see if they need additional funding. And of course, we will be using the contingency reserve as soon as they run out of the 6 billion that has been allocated to them. I'm just gonna ask Riza to deal with the COGTA questions, please.
Thank you. Thank you, honorable members. The underspending at COGTA, it's largely the local government equitable share that we've withheld. Now, the reason that we withheld it is that some municipalities, so they've got unspent conditional grant money. And what happens then, there's a rollover process for approval of that unspent money for a rollover. Now, what happens that if that rollover is not approved, then municipalities have to return that funding to the National Revenue Fund. Now, where you have instances where municipalities haven't returned that money to the National Revenue Fund, then that money is offset through a withholding of the local government equitable share. So what this is, it's more of an offsetting than an underspending, because on the department's books, it's recorded as an underspending. But in practical terms, it's offset the unspent conditional grant money that wasn't approved for a rollover. And the second thing I just want to speak about is the two departments with regard to human settlements and water and sanitation. So those are two departments. They are two separate votes. Human settlements is vote 33 and water and sanitation is vote 41. But these two departments have one minister. So it's basically two departments with a single minister. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you done with the responses for now, Dr. Mampo?
Yes, Chairperson, thank you. We're done with the responses.
Okay, I'm comfortable with the explanation of the two votes with one minister, because I can relate to that. Can I check with the members if they need a second bite or follow-ups? Honorable Ryder? Anyone else? Let's give Honorable Ryder for now.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Yeah, thanks for the answers. I picked up a comment about risk aversion and the costing of borrowing, which just triggered a thought in my head. And of course, we've had a stay of execution from the ratings agencies, but I'm aware that ratings agencies also tend to talk to Treasury quite a bit in between cycles where they actually make pronouncements. And I was wondering if there was any indication from the rating agencies, firstly, what they think of the budget, if it does enough to placate them, make them feel a little bit better, or to at least make them not feel any worse about us, and also how they feel about some of the threats around us at the moment, things like the Section 25 amendment and the delay in elections. It's obviously, I'm not sure at what level the ratings agencies are engaging, but if there is any information that might give us an indication, because it's going to affect our cost of borrowings going forward, which obviously trickles down into what we can spend on the different departments. I think that the acknowledgements by Ms. Mahloli were quite interesting, and the fact that she said that we may have to, privatization is off the cards, and we may have to pay someone to take the state-owned entities off our hands, which is, I think, quite scary. And the point was well made that the Department of Public Enterprises is the one that's receiving all of these bailouts, and they are the department that's causing us all of our grey hairs and also a lot of our disagreements in this committee, Chairperson. So I think that the suggestion that we call the DPE to come and appear before this committee is a good one, and I think they need to come and give account and let us know that they're spending money correctly. I mean, it was good news to hear that Eskom has reduced their debt burden substantially in the last financial year. The last time we heard from Treasury on Eskom is that there was a general feeling that Eskom had not taken the problems that they had to heart, and they hadn't taken ownership. So, clearly there appears to have been a change in that, based purely on the fact that they've changed their behavior. So perhaps it's a good time to call the Department of Public Enterprises to come and talk to our committee and tell us about how they're spending all of this extra money that we're giving them, and also to explain to us why their forward projections mean that we so often have to do emergency allocations, etc. Their planning doesn't seem to be correct. And then lastly, to explain to us what we can expect going forward. So, Chair, that please would be my plea to the committee, is that we consider inviting the DPE. Chair, and then there were some very interesting comments about the funding of the military, which I appreciated, and I will be taking those up with the Joint Standing Committee on Defence, and I think that we can look forward to an engagement with Treasury in that committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who wants to have a second bite, honourable members? I was going to speak to what you have spoken to, Honourable Ryder, the issue of the advice from Tsepiso, that we can have a discussion with the Department of Enterprise. I buy into that idea, but I want members also to have a say on this, so that it's not what you and I agree on. It should be a committee resolution. But I further want to add that maybe we also need to have an engagement. While we have an engagement with the department, we need to include the sector committee in the discussion, so that we don't leave them behind and we do things in their area and they are excluded in the process. I see I have a hand of Honourable Tutoit. Honourable Ryder, you want to come back again, or is this an old hand?
Old hand, Chair, sir.
Okay, Honourable Tutoit.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Honourable Chair, just in response to National Treasury's answer with regards to the state-owned companies and the fact that they will not be able to be privatized at this stage because of the dire state that they find themselves in. Does that mean that we will have to provide bailouts or so-called investments to these state-owned companies until the end of time? Because it's obvious that these state-owned companies will not be able to turn themselves around in the near future. And it is draining the fiscus. If they could just elaborate on that, please.
Okay, thank you. Members, can you speak to the suggestions, please, of including DPE and the sector committee?
Chairperson, I agree. Thank you, Eunice.
Thank you. We will see the possibility of having them in our next meeting next week when we deal with the report. If not, we will communicate to members as to when are they available. Thank you very much. Dr. Mampo, a follow-up question from Honorable Ryder.
I will take it, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tsepiso.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question, Honorable Ryder. Definitely credit ratings play an important role. And you'll recall that at the start of the pandemic last year, end of March, we lost our remaining investment credit rating from Moody's. So currently we are rated sub-investment grade by all the ratings that we have solicited. And that is something of a concern in terms of when we engaged with the ratings. We did have conversations with the ratings after we've tabled the budget for them to understand where we are and how are we dealing with the issues that they've raised in the past. And some of these issues have been around growth and the fact that the economic growth reforms are taking longer to be implemented. Also the risk to the fiscus and the fact that we are not consolidating our fiscus as we should, and the level of debt to GDP relative to our peers is quite high, and therefore our ability to finance the debt when it comes due becomes very much questionable from where they sit. And also state-owned companies continue to play a big role in terms of the kind of pressure that they are putting on the fiscus, and also wages, given the current conversations, also something that is quite uncertain and risk to the fiscal framework. And after engaging with all of them, Honorable Ryder, they chose not to obviously move. Moody's chose not to issue any statement. S&P and Fitch did issue statements, and in those statements we have published them on the website, also available the original press releases of these entities. But those would be the big issues, and further deterioration in our debt to GDP will obviously result in a negative credit rating. If growth prospects also fail to recover over the medium term, and continuous financing pressures mounting will also then impact on our fiscus. The much discussed issue today of state-owned companies also would have a negative impact on the balance sheet of government and also on the ratings as well. And factors that could lead to positive credit ratings, as outlined by these rating agencies, would be a successful implementation of structural reforms, and also a very clear and credible formulation of a path that would then stabilize our debt to GDP over the medium term, looking at implementation of reforms, not just the economic ones, but also SOC reforms that would lead to the reduction in government contingent liability. In this case, that would be guarantees, successful negotiation with labor in order to reduce the wage bill will substantially also contribute towards the credit ratings of the country. But as we currently sit, the Fitch and S&P decided to just affirm the current rating, and most of them are waiting for the outcomes of the wage negotiation, and also to see how the structural reforms are panning out in the midst of this crisis, which they also have taken into consideration as one aspect that not only impacts South Africa, but also impact other countries as well. Chair, on the Eskom matter, I mean, you were at pains the last meeting we had with yourself. It was a joint meeting with SCOA as well, and we were put in a very hot seat in relation to conditions that were imposed on the special appropriation for Eskom, and how are we going to make sure, that the bailout is going towards reducing the debt of Eskom. And I think what you're seeing currently, it's exactly that. It's the fact that this bailout is going towards paying off the debt of Eskom, and also the fact that we have been stringent in terms of issuing guarantees where state-owned companies are not able to service. We don't think guarantees are the right instrument. Instead, they should actually come to a transparent budget process and request funds that are needed, and they should be part of the trade-offs that are being made, as we saw that a whole lot of departments that are service delivery departments are impacted when we take money from them and give to state-owned companies or other objectives. So it's important that they also become part of that process. So that's why we've seen the impact on Eskom's debt. I would suspect that with the rand-dollar appreciation as well, it has had an impact on how they value the foreign debt, which would also contribute to that. But overall, I mean, we're working very closely with Eskom, given that we also have a responsibility, and as promised to yourselves that, we'll make sure that those conditions are being adhered to, and they're not just conditions on paper, but there is work that is being done to make sure that Eskom does turn around, Eskom does implement the reforms that were outlined by their shareholder department, supported obviously by government, to make sure that it is able to continue to provide the energy, electricity that is required, but at the same time reduce reliance on the fiscus. And as stated earlier, 80% of the guarantees that are on the balance sheet would be for Eskom. So it's important that the sustainability of Eskom and the improvement of their financial position would mean the risk is reduced in terms of requiring more funds from the fiscus. Lastly, Chair, if I can deal with the issue of privatization. I mean, I was speaking on based on what I've seen with other entities that have been looked to be privatized. I would not say privatization, which really not something that we usually use as a term, but I would not say that private sector participation is off the cards. There could be investors who are looking for something different in these entities and could, potentially still get stake in these entities. So it is, I would not outright say it's off the table. I think it depends on the kind of investor who comes in. I was just generally saying that in most cases, you don't see those kind of transactions happen when entities are already in a very dire financial situation, because what are you buying is the question that we need to ask ourselves. And I think those funders or investors would have to do proper due diligence to see whether there is value that they can unlock, and they can then make sure they've got returns in terms of the investment that they have made in relation to SOCs. But I mean, that as a policy of government is something that is on the table, and something that private sector participation is encouraged. And I think entities that are able to do so, they have been encouraged to bring proposals forth to Cabinet for consideration. Chair, I'll stop there. I think I've covered all the questions that came through, but to the extent that I haven't, I'm happy to be directed. Thanks a lot, Chair.
Thank you, Tsepiso. Mampo, are you fine with the responses?
And I think the focus here would be on the infrastructure. So what the President was referring to would be the infrastructure fund where the allocation was made for a couple of years. So now we're looking at 4 billion, I think, for this year. So Honorable Ryder, I think the key here is, how do we do the consolidation in such a way that we stabilize the debt and not get to a position where we have a collapse in the system. We explain the trade-offs on the impact of these budget reductions, but what is key is how do we then align to the President. So there's 2 things that we have done, amongst other things. The first one is, as I said, to allocate funding for the infrastructure fund, and we have a unit that is in the presidency where we're trying to basically mobilize private sector funding using this infrastructure fund. So basically we're looking at projects such as the student housing project for universities, where government is going to invest a portion of this, and also the private sector. So the infrastructure fund is in the budget, and we also, as I said, protected the spending on infrastructure. So the funding that we have moved from PRASA, it's not to reduce infrastructure, but it's because of their ability to spend the funding. The other thing that we have been doing to align to the President is the 11 billion that has been provisionally allocated to the employment initiative. So some of these, yes, this is a consolidation budget, but as I said, what we're also trying to do is to enhance and push in chapter 2, basically there's a detail on how we plan to use Operation Vulindlela to implement structural reforms that are quite needed for the country. I'm looking at some of these reforms that we have been referring to, and the first one is the generation of electricity, and here we're looking at how do we bring or fast track the independent power producers, and as I think the office has already announced some of the bidding in that process. What do we do basically with the employment creation, and looking at the first phase of the Presidential Employment Initiative, and then how do we support industrial growth? Here we're looking at some of the allocations that we have done in the agricultural sector, in the DTI space, which is incentives, as well as in the small business, where basically we have provided 233 million in supporting of small scale businesses. Infrastructure, I spoke about it, but basically the pipeline that we have is worth 340 billion in different industries such as energy, water, transport, and telecommunications. So this work has already begun. And as I said, there is a unit in the presidency that's pushing this, but also what we have been looking at is how do we then involve entities such as Transnet to deal with some of the ports, especially the Port of Durban. So these are some of the incentives or the structural reforms that we've already implemented. And I'm not gonna not acknowledge the fact that reducing spending is to some extent not fully supporting what the President has announced, but what we had to look at as government, including the President, because of course the budget is, we cannot present a budget that has not been approved by Cabinet, where the President is the head, of course, is that these budget reductions, if we are not done, and they were not done, and we cannot prove that our finances can stabilize, then we have bigger problems that we have to deal with, and those will include the funding, the cost of funding, the fact that we're already in junk status and all of that. So the implications of not fiscally consolidating are more dire than fiscally consolidation, but with these reforms and these measures that we've put in the budget, we think that it will support growth. But as I said, the key now is how fast do we implement these structural reforms, and how fast do we make decisions in order to make sure that these reforms take place. So those are the things that we try to do in order to support growth and align to the State of the Nation address. Chairperson, Dr. Fletcher is on the line, but I think I have responded to the link between the State of the Nation address as well as the budget. Thank you, Chair.
I see his hand is up. I think he still wants to have a bite on the matter.
Thanks, Chair. Just if you wanted, I wasn't, sorry, I had to step out for a minute to one of these urgent vaccine meetings. So I'm not sure if your vaccine question was fully answered, but if I could just perhaps give 1 or 2 sentences on that. So
it was put. Yes, you can respond to that.
Oh, okay, thank you. So look, I think we're fairly confident that the allocation is fully adequate for the vaccines. There's the initial 4.35 billion on the budget this year. There's the rollovers from last year. So there's part of that rollover process. There's the revenue that's being raised from the sales to the private sector, which can be appropriated back to the department. There's potential Section 6 additional allocations based on what the Minister of Finance announced in the budget review numbers. And there's the adjustment budget. So already 63 million doses have been purchased, and for 47 million lives. Only a third of the current allocation is currently being spent. So we're kind of watching this space quite closely, and we will be able to allocate additional at any point if we need to. There are currently 5 million Pfizer doses already available for June. So June is very well covered. The only problem we're sitting with right now is the hold-up on the J&J vaccines because of the issue in the US. So we're quite dependent on the Pfizer, and depending on how long that hold-up goes on for, at some point a decision might need to be taken to switch out to, for example, more Pfizer and less J&J. But I think that's something the Department of Health needs to guide on. But I think we are largely covered, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Team Treasury. I think we're done with the responses. Members are fine with, are comfortable with the responses that they have received so far. I want to thank you for the engagements that you availed yourself for, and also want to thank the responses. You have been open enough to give us clarities on issues that we have to take decisions on, so that when we take those decisions, we are well informed. Team Treasury, thank you so much. You can be excused if you so feel. And I'm going to request the members to stay behind so that we deal with only one set of meetings that is outstanding. Mr. Notata, I see your hand is up.
Yes, Chairperson, I'm sorry for disturbing your chair. Chair, I thought before you release Team National Treasury, you're going to ask our colleagues from PBO, maybe Dr. Orlandi, to have a comment if she has something to say, Chair, or anyone from PBO.
Okay, I wasn't aware that the PBO is on the line. If they are, you are welcomed. You can also have a comment, PBO.
Thank you, Chairperson. It's Nelia speaking. There's just 2 things that I can mention that we also had in our presentation to the Standing Committee, but I think Treasury has already spoken to it. and also answered some of the questions. The one thing that we actually identified is like, although the proportion that government spend on compensation, sorry?
I can't see you.
I'm not dressed up, Chair. So although government reduced the compensation or trying to reduce the proportion that we spend, it went down from 9.8% to 9.5%. But we must just be aware of the fact that departments can basically use consultants instead of staff. So we also saw that the goods and services proportion went up from 4.4% last year to 4.6%, and consultants are within goods and services. One of the other things that we also mentioned in our presentation was that a lot of the national departments actually transfer funds to other institutions to deliver the services. But in such instances, we actually identified that the proportion that we spend on compensation of COEs is generally then below 10%, and goods and services as well. So in most departments, the proportion of spend on goods and services are lower than the proportion spent on COE, except for a few departments such as Stats SA. So the proportion that they spend on COE is 33%, but then they spend 59.8% on goods and services. So one will have to look deeper into such instances on what they really spend, and if we really get value for money in such instances. One of the other departments that we also picked up, for example, is military veterans. They spend 19.4% on COE, but the goods and services are 40.4% of the total budget. And then we also went further, just to link on with how departments can reprioritize or restructure. Basically, we looked at, we took out the transfers that departments spend, and then we again looked at what they then spend on other components. So basically, I just want to get the slide on my computer. So So transfers to provinces and local government is mainly in the form of conditional grants. These conditional grants are mainly for infrastructure spending, so job creation and skills development linked to the economic recovery plan. So one of the members also identified where we spend the money. So most of the money that is allocated for the economic recovery plan, and what the president was saying, is in the form of conditional grants. So conditional grants is so important to actually monitor on how we spend on conditional grants. That is what we said. And members also, I don't know, you've received some of our analysis of the conditional grants, the outcomes of the expenditure as well as the performance. And within this week, we will still also send out our analysis on education as well as human settlements. And you will see in human settlements, really there was a real underspending as well as underperformance just in human settlements. So yes, I was talking about when we take out the transfers in departments, you will see in some departments such as the National School of Government, they basically spend, and then we calculated the proportion that they spend on administration. That is what we wanted to show in terms of how departments can also reprioritize, or departments can merge. In the National School of Government, we found that if we take out the transfers, they basically spend 51% of their budget on administration. So if the National School of Department merged with the other department, for example, we can save a lot of money. That is basically what we wanted to illustrate with our presentation, but I think members do have our presentation, or we can send it to you as well. So the main theme of our presentation was, where can government basically save or reprioritize to save money or to be more efficient. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nelia. There's a message for you on the chat. You can just check. I just thought you need to read that good message on your own. Thank you for your presentations. I've just confirmed to the Secretariat on the question that you had, if whether we have received your analysis. We have not received it, and we'll appreciate it if you can just send those that analysis and the presentation through the Secretariat, so that he can send it to members and members can be more empowered. But we really appreciate your input. I wasn't aware that you are on the platform. It was not intentional that I exclude you from the discussion. Thank you so much. Honorable members, I don't think there will be anything that you want to say on Nelia's PBO's input. Lubabalo?
I think Dr. Mampo has been provoked, Chair.
Oh, Dr. Mampo Mudise.
Chairperson, I'm not provoked. I just wanted to let honorable members know that we have published the zero-based budgeting framework on the National Treasury website, but I am going to send it to Cindy so that we can circulate it for the honorable members to see the plans and the timelines that we have developed to implement the ZBB framework. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. And that was the question that came from Honorable Ryder. I hope, Honorable Ryder, you are not also provoked. You're fine. I'm not provoking you. Okay, thank you. With that sign. Thank you, Team PBO, Team Treasury. Thank you so much. We welcome your participation at all times and outlining, clarifying us. Thank you. We now go to the minutes of the 26th. The 26th of May 2021. We have received these minutes last week, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But we have received them. It's not for the first time we see them. Let's move to the next page. These are attendees. Just go up a little. I have tried to check Honorable Mkiva. I didn't see him here as present nor apologized. Is it there? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
He's there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move to the next page. Page 3, 4, 5. That's the last page. Can I get a mover for adoption of these minutes as a true reflection of the...
I move, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Karim. Can I get a seconder?
I second, Honorable Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable for seconding. And Otulu Sumtwana. Thank you. Honorable members, I think we have come to the end of our meeting. We, as Appropriations, will meet again next week, Wednesday, to deal with the report. Thank you very much, honorable members. Please take care. Enjoy your weekend. For those who are busy like us, let's soldier on. Thank you so much.
Chairperson,
Yes, Papa.
on a point of procedure, can I propose closure to this meeting?
I've closed it. Out of the meeting, proposing closure. Outside.
No, thank you, comrade.
You stay young forever.
No, thank you. Thank you, comrade.